Our first speaker is Olivia J. from Durham, United Kingdom. Her home group is the Trudging the Road to Merton CA group, and she will be speaking on A New Life Has Been Given Us for 30 minutes. Olivia embodies the heart of Alcoholics Anonymous, honesty, service and hope. She brings authenticity, hard-earned wisdom, and the kind of energy that fills the room and reminds us why we keep coming back. Olivia, over to you.
Thank you, Celine. Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia. I'm an alcoholic. I just want to start by saying thank you for allowing us to be here, but not only that, thank you for allowing us to be here with my sponsor. It feels like a real privilege and honour to be able to do this, and I know I really don't want to blow too much smoke up Sherry's arse, but the truth is, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for this woman. And truthfully, the topic that's been chosen wasn't my idea or Sherry's actually, and I think it's just so beautiful, that God's been able to come through and direct us to this message, especially for where I am today, because I'm truly living this, I'm living in this new life that has been given to us, by the grace of this power that I didn't believe in, by the grace of a power that I didn't know existed. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous around 5.5 years ago, but my sobriety didn't start then. I had a little bit of time of kind of being in and out, and I struggled in that time. And I used to try and reflect on that and think, why was I struggling so much? But the truth is, I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't committed. I hadn't, fully conceded to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic and that I couldn't use like other people could. And when I look back to that time in my life, the pain, the misery, the suffering, and I couldn't comprehend it, I couldn't understand it, I couldn't see it, but I was living in it and it felt real. When I fast forward to today and my time throughout, working the steps and having new experiences, I've been able to see that God has always been evident in my life. It was me that chose to block that off. It was me that, wasn't willing to see that. And today that's what I kind of want to talk about. And some of the readings that I've brought tonight is based around that, and it ties into the reading that was chosen, and in that As Bill Sees It book, it's got a page that says A New Life, and on the bottom of that it says, regardless of worldly success or failure, regardless of pain or joy, regardless of sickness or health, or even of death itself, a new life of endless possibilities can be lived if we are willing to continue our awakening through the practice of AA's 12 steps. And I just thought, how powerful is that? It's telling me there that it doesn't matter whether I'm in pain and misery or whether I'm in joy and happiness, God is still there. God's grace is working through me even when I don't want it to, and it's funny because it was only about a week ago that I was on the phone to Sherry and I'd lost my head, and everything was going wrong, and I'd put myself in a position to be hurt is the truth. But, at that point, I wasn't looking at it that way. At that point, I was the victim and everything was, everybody else's fault. And I wanted everybody else to believe that, and I wanted everybody to see my point of view. And, Sherry turned round and said to her, she says, Olivia, these problems are of our own making. And I thought, oh, that hurt. That really hurt. But the truth is it is, and that's been my experience time and time and time again. I show up in this program and, I can practice these principles and I can work with others and, I can go to meetings and I can talk the talk. But when it comes down to it, what am I doing behind closed doors? That's where my new life begins. That's where God comes in and gives me this stuff. I have to practice this in all of my affairs, not just when shit hits the fan, not just when things are going really good. It has to be a balance. And for me, when I come into the rooms, I was only 22-year-old at the time. I'm very blessed. My mum's on this meeting, my partner's on this meeting, some of my very good friends are on this meeting. I've got sponsees on this meeting tonight, and I'm very blessed to have that tribe around us, But when I first come into the rooms, I was 22-year-old, very naive, full of ego, full of pride, full of self-righteousness. And I played a very good victim mentality. You would drink if you had the life that I did. And the thing is, my drinking took me to a place that I never, ever, ever believed it would. It got to the point where I was homeless, I was on the streets, I was living in and out of people's houses that I didn't know, I was selling my body on the streets for money and other outside issues. That was the life that I began to live because of my alcoholism. That's where this stuff took me to. And I'm not going to talk too much about the mess. I don't believe it needs to be a full share on that. But, that was where this stuff got me to. It got me to a place of being absolutely broken. And when it talks about it in the book, it says that we can't comprehend the wreckage of our past, the pain and suffering of even a week or a month ago. And that was me, because time and time again, I was coming into these rooms and I couldn't understand why I kept going back to alcohol. Why do I keep doing this to myself? Why can I not do this like everybody else can? Why is all of my friends and family getting sober but I'm not? And I was back in that victim mentality of why me, poor me, wondering why I kept picking up a drink. But the truth is I didn't understand step one, and that's what I've been taught throughout my time in recovery, and by the grace of a very loving, powerful God, and God willing, I'll be turning 4 years sober on the 27th of this month on Friday, and because of the life that I've been able to build by working these steps. And when I look to my step one experience, step one answered the questions that I'd been asking for so many years. Step one taught me what I suffered from. And the minute that I found out that I was living with a disease I didn't even know I had, I was able to understand that. How was I ever meant to do any better than what I was doing? I had this thing that I didn't even know existed. So how could I portray anything better than what I did? When I looked at the unmanageability, people say in the book says that the unmanageability is about the inside stuff, it's the internal. But for me, it was much more than that, because I didn't understand emotions and feelings when I first come into these rooms. What I understood was the wreckage of people's pasts. I understood when people were talking about the materialistics that they had suffered from, I understood when people were saying that they were in and out of different rehabs. I understood when people were talking about losing their jobs and their partners and their families. And, I could relate to all of that stuff because I'd lived through that. Then they started talking about this emotional stuff and I was like, oh, I don't know what that is, The only emotion I ever believed I'd experienced at that point in my life was happy, sad or angry. That was the only three things I come to these rooms with. I didn't know anything else. I wasn't the type of person that was very spiritual or looking inside, before I got here. That is the beauty of this stuff. Today I've been taught how to look for that. Today I've been taught to look at where is my emotions today, how am I showing up in life today, and page 52 describes it perfectly. And I turn the bedevilment into questions today. Am I having trouble with personal relationships? Am I a prey to misery and depression? Can I control my emotional natures, and so on and so on. And that's what I do. And it gives me a measure of where I'm at within my program, where I'm at with God. And I hear it a lot. People will say, don't talk about God too much because it scares the newcomers off. Well, please come back when you're ready, because that's what I had to do. When I wasn't ready to hear the word God, I wasn't ready for recovery. That's the top and bottom of it, and I'm sorry, I'm going to say controversial things when I speak, and I don't mean it to offend anybody. I just get a little bit passionate, and it's been my experience. It doesn't mean it's everybody else's. When I look at, what has God given me through this stuff, at first it was the materialistics. I got a house, I got a job, I got the partner, I got the family back, Then I was absolutely blessed with this gorgeous little girl, who I was told I was never going to be able to have. For years and years I was told I'll never ever be able to have children. 2 years ago I gave birth to a very healthy little girl, and she's absolutely thriving in life. And I believe today that that was the power of God, because on my own power I couldn't do that. I couldn't stop using alcohol to be able to give my body what it needed, but God knew how to give that to me, and when I talk about all of these things that I've experienced and that I've come from, I don't do that for people to say, oh my God, I do it because the newcomers need to be able to come into these rooms and share honestly and share openly and know that this is a safe space. Of course I don't want to sit here and say that I was prostituting myself on the streets, but the truth is, if it wasn't for somebody doing that before me, I probably wouldn't. I needed to hear people talking about that stuff in these rooms. I needed to hear the honesty. I needed to hear where people's lives got to, because that was relatable for me, And when I mentioned earlier about that little reading, and it talks about regardless of the pain or joy that we suffer or that we experience throughout this program, it really led us back to the step 3 promises. When I read that, it got us thinking about, what does step 3 promise me? And some of the things that I love what it talks about, it says, established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs, and that catches me out quite a lot today. My ego rebuilds and my little plans and designs, come back to life, and I think I can manage this stuff on my own. And Sherry beautifully taught us, that the first word in the first step is we. But yet for some reason my brain still tries to tell me that I can do this by myself, that I've got the right answer, that I'm going to be okay and I can sort this out and I can manage this and I'll just try this instead. But the truth is, every time I do that, it ends up more painful. Every time I do that, I end up looking back at step 1. Where am I trying to control and manage? Where am I unmanageable because I'm trying to control and manage? I don't have the power to do this stuff on my own. And this is what I've had to be taught through going through this process. I had to be taught how to pick the phone up and reach out. I had to be taught how to go into meetings and be honest. I had to be taught how to get vulnerable in front of other people, because their masks that I'd wore for so many years, told me you can't do that. You can't let people in. You can't let people see the real you. You've got to stand up and fight for what you believe in. But the truth is, that got me broken. Living that lifestyle got me to a place where I didn't want to be here anymore, and I was happy for the drink to take me out. I was happy to go out there and live a life absolutely ran by self-will, because it was all I ever knew. And when I come into these rooms, you guys taught us different. You showed us a different way. You showed us this path of getting connected. And I love the title of this meeting, deep down within every man, woman and child is the fundamental idea of God. I came here with a belief in God. It just wasn't the right one. But that's okay. Do you know why? Because you guys taught us how to change that belief. You guys taught us what it meant to get connected to a power greater than myself. And Sherry, when I went through the step 4 process with Sherry and we moved on to step 5, and I had my lists, and she said, Olivia, I want you to get on your hands and knees and I want you to fire all of them people as your higher power. And that was a whole new experience in itself, because for so long I was injecting power into people, places and things. For so long I was relying on my mum and my partner and my friends and, my sponsees and the treatment centre that I worked in to keep me clean and sober. But the truth is, this book tells me that no human power can relieve me of my alcoholism. So why do I continue to go back to human power? I go back to that stuff because it was a learned behaviour. I go back to that stuff because I suffer from low self-esteem and low self-worth. But guess what happens? I go to step 3 and it tells us that I can hand that stuff over to God. And then I get Godfidence, and then I get God-esteem. I get all of these things from God that I search for in other people. But time and time again, I go back into that loop, and I don't ever sit on these meetings and preach that I'm this perfect recovered 12-stepper, because I'm far from. I make mistakes, I get messy, I do things wrong, I learn, and I move on. And I think that's one of the biggest things for me, is I don't stay in the mess. Once I'm out of that side of it and I've done some columned inventory, or I've shared it with another person and I've took it to God, right, next, let's move on. I don't need to stay in that pain and misery and suffering that I felt for so long. I don't need to live in that today, because these principles and these steps allowed me a way out of that. When I do stay in that stuff, that becomes a choice for me. I start to choose to be the victim. I start to choose to want everybody on my side. I start to choose to let my ego rebuild, because the truth is, this stuff's been laid out in front of me in clear-cut directions. I have a choice in picking the phone up today. I have a choice in getting on my knees and praying today. I have a choice in leaning into God today. When I don't do that stuff, that's on me. Nobody's going to walk into these rooms and do this for me, and that's something that, again, I was taught very early on. When I look at, the new life that's been given to me today, and I've already mentioned, sometimes it still gets a little bit messy, but when I look at the stuff that I have gained from this program, and I'm not going to talk too much about materialistic stuff, but even looking at the inside, I was the person that come into these rooms, and even though I had this ego, and even though I had to present myself as somebody that had it all going on, every single time that I would walk past someone, I'd say sorry. They would bump into me and I would say sorry, because I didn't know how to be around people. I was so fearful, so full of shame, so full of guilt. My head would be on the floor constantly. You know, today's not like that. Today I can look people in the eye. Today I get to hold conversations with people, even when sometimes I don't want to, you know, but they don't know that. Today I get to show up in life and I get to be present, you know, even through the times that's quite difficult and quite tough. You know, I get to stand there and I get to be a representation of God. I get to be a representation of AA and what AA stands for. You know, but that didn't come overnight, guys. That took a little bit of a while to get to that place. And, you know, when I came to Sherry in May last year, and it's quite funny. We had our first phone call and she was like, so tell us what's going on, you know, what do you do? And I was like, well, I work in a treatment centre, I go to this many meetings, I've got this many sponsees, I've got all of this service, I'm this amount of years clean, you know, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and blah, 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 blah. And she just went, so why do you need me? And I was like, oh, shit. Right, well, now I don't know what to say, because the truth is I was living in this place where, again, I felt like I had control, you know, because I'm standing in the middle of that triangle, but I'm dying on the inside. You know, it doesn't matter how many sponsees you've got. It doesn't matter how much service you've got. It doesn't matter how many times you've been through these steps. If you're not putting it into application, then you will end up going, well, sorry, I can't talk about you. I will end up going back over. You know, and that was my experience. I was 3 years clean and I was still suffering alcoholic inside of the rooms because I let up on these spiritual principles. I thought that the outside had to look okay before the inside felt okay. Today I've learned how to reverse that. You know, today I've learned how to flip the switch on that. When the inside is okay for me today, everything on the outside's a doddle. You know, everything on the outside is an absolute breeze because I'm connected with God. I'm sat with that power. You know, and when I came through the process this time of going back through the steps, you know, I think Sherry's like my 8th sponsor in 5.5 years, and I couldn't tell you how many times I've been through the steps. I don't think I've ever had a sponsor longer than about 6 months, you know, because they were the problem, never me. You know, it was always their fault, and I couldn't connect to them, and they were doing this and they were doing that, and blah, 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 blah. The problem was it was absolutely nothing to do with the sponsors. They've all been amazing and they've all taught us things that I needed to learn. The problem was I was so uncomfortable with self that I didn't want to hear the truth. I didn't want to be challenged. I didn't want to be told when I was in the wrong. I certainly didn't want to have to make amends to people because it affected my pride and ego. And then I'm sitting there wondering, why am I dying on the inside at 3 years clean? You know, doesn't this time that I've got behind us mean anything? But the truth is, time means nothing. Absolutely nothing. When we're not practicing these spiritual principles and implementing them into our daily life, you know, in every area, you know, who knows what's going to happen. For me, I was very close to picking up. That was my truth. So when I went back through the process with Sherry, you know, and she taught us about step 1, and she taught us about how it meant to be in control and to be trying to manage everything. And it was the first time I'd ever heard that, you know, I'd looked at step 1 as all I have to do is admit that I'm powerless, and then I can tick it off and move on to the next. And then I got to step 2 and it was like, well, all I have to do is just be willing. And my old sponsor said to us, so are you willing, Olivia? I said, yeah, of course. I had to tick it off the list. You know, because I treat these steps as a ticky box. I thought that that's what I had to do. I thought I just had to tick them off the list and move on to the next, and then everything could be fine. Sherry taught us this time through that step 2 is more than just a ticky box. You know, step 2 is about where am I in belief and not reliance upon God. You know, am I actually willing to put my life and my will into God's hands, or am I not? Because if I'm not willing, then there's no point going to step 3. You know, but what does willing mean? Willing for me means, you know, putting in action into something that I didn't believe in or that I didn't want to do, or, you know, it means trying something different for once instead of what Olivia believes is right, or believing what Olivia wants to do. And step 3, this is honestly like the experience that I have had with step 3 this time around has totally changed my whole life. And I truly believe that this is where, you know, of course I practice the other steps, but this is where my life has really, really rocketed into the 4th dimension because of step 3. Because I understand today what it means to give everything to God. I understand what it means today to not sit in my bedroom and open my eyes on a morning and say, right, God, I'm giving everything to you today. You can take this, 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 and this, because I can't be bothered no more. And then 30 seconds later, I go downstairs, the dogs are barking, the baby's crying, Michael's twisting on about something, and I'm just in an uproar. And I'll try this and I'll do this, and maybe if I just do this, then they'll stop acting like that, and I can chill out for 5 minutes. Aye. Time and time and time again. And yeah, I'm the alcoholic in the room sitting saying that I practice step 3 when that's my behaviours before I've even gotten to the bottom of the stairs on a morning. That is not what step 3 is about. Step 3 is about trusting and relying upon this power, knowing and understanding that this power has got my back through everything. Sometimes today when I get out of bed and I do my little prayer and meditation, I have to do it again when I get to the bottom of the stairs because I know what I'm about to walk into. But that is so much better than me walking into that and then kicking off. Sometimes it's just about reapplying the stuff that I've just practiced 30 seconds ago. Sometimes it's about initiating the pause. Sometimes it's about me going into life and thinking, actually, Olivia, give the reins away, give that stuff to God and leave it there. Stop trying to take it back. My little plans and designs don't work for me. And my experience has showed me that time and time and time again. And I'm not going to sit there, guys, and say that I do that perfectly every day. I don't. Sometimes I still come through the sitting room door in the morning and I get a little bit arsey because I can't be bothered with the world yet. But the truth is, that I truly, genuinely know today. I don't even just believe, I know today that God is with me through this stuff. I've been able to see, through my existence of the 12-step program that God is there no matter what. And I used to hear people say, God will only come in if he's invited. But that wasn't my experience, and I used to share that quite a lot. The truth is, God comes in for me even when I don't want him to be there. If he didn't, you would have a different speaker tonight. Because there's so many times throughout my journey through recovery that I didn't want to be here. That I wanted to go. I couldn't handle the mess and the chaos and the carnage that I placed myself in. But God always showed up. God always guided us back to you guys. God always said he's a safe space for you to go and talk openly about your feelings and what's going on. He is a person on this path before you that you can go share your shit with and get some solution. That's what God did for me, because I'm not powerful enough to do that for me. I don't hold enough stand in my own life to be able to make them decisions sometimes, and that's why it's so important to have these people around you. And I have to find that balance. I have to find the balance of where do I go to other people and where do I use the brains that God's given me? Because that's what the book tells us. When I get further through the program and I get to step 10 and 11, it says God give us brains to use. So where do I start to use my brains? Where do I start to make decisions that align with God's will? That's the sort of stuff that I have to look at today. Is my actions and my thought processes and my feelings and my emotions aligned with what God wants? And when it's not, I go to another person and I ask for their experience. But when I believe that it is, I go out there and I do God's work. I do what God's directed me to do. And something that I always struggled with as well was to understand what is God's will and what is mine. And I said this to Sherry the other week. I said, I'm really struggling to figure out what's God's will and what's my will, and is that coming together? And she said, Olivia, it's not your business to figure that out. God will show you. God will direct you. God will put people in your path to get you to where you need to be. You just need to sit back, relax and take it easy. And that's something that our phone calls end up being quite often, I hear that all the time, relax and take it easy. But for a control freak like me, sometimes that can be difficult, and I need people to remind us of that. And that's what this program does. It allows people to come into my life and remind us of the things that I already know I've just forgotten. Because that's what this is about. It's about carrying the message even when we don't believe we've got one. It's about carrying the message even though, we living in the chaos and the madness ourselves. My pain and my misery can help somebody else's pain and misery. My love and my kindness can help somebody else's love and kindness, because no two peoples are the same. What I experience might be similar to somebody else, but they might have a different spin on it. that might have been the solution that I was looking for. And this isn't really a recovery saying, but it's something that I like to remember, you know, a problem shared is a problem halved. I have to share this stuff with you guys, and I have to share this stuff with God. And I had a conversation the other day with my partner. I'm very blessed, you know, my partner's also a 12-stepper, and we have some really good conversations. And we were having a conversation the other day about, you know, where do I find that I'm kind of placing myself in these positions where you know, I'm struggling to see what's the truth, what's not the truth, basically. You know, what's true and what's not. Especially when it comes to like the God concept and, you know, helping others and being of service and all of that stuff, because my ego wants to tell me that my way is right and everybody else's way is wrong. And one of the things that I was able to see through that is, for a long time I relied so heavily on other people to tell me the right answers, but the directions of the book actually state that we go to God first. You know, I have to take this stuff to God first, not second, not third, not last. I go to God first. And because I've been practicing that now, my life has shifted. Everything about my being has shifted. You know, I've been able to see the truth. I've been able to recognize what God's trying to tell us, because I'm no longer in conversation with just another human being who sometimes is just as sick as me, by the way, because I like to talk to the people that's just as sick as me, so I feel justified in my actions, you know. And then I get on the phone to Sherry and she tells us, you know, exactly what I need to hear, not what I want to hear, and, you know, I cry a little bit and then we move on. But isn't that the power of this stuff? You know, to be accountable, to be responsible, to have somebody there to be able to guide you and show you what this stuff means. Because that's what Jerry did for me. You know, she come into my life when I needed it the most. I truly, truly believe God knew that. And the times where we sit I could get emotional now, we sit on the phone together, you know, and it's almost like we've got this alignment, and she's in the USA and I'm in the United Kingdom. You know, I've never met this woman face to face. I've never been able to give this woman a cuddle as much as I wish I could, you know, but she just gets it. She gets me. She understands what it is that I need to hear, and she's not afraid to tell us that, you know. And that's the power and the beauty of this stuff, man. That's what the newcomers need in these rooms. They need people that's going to show them, that's going to guide them, that's going to tell them when they're in the wrong, you know, as painful as that might be sometimes. That's what I needed. That has been my experience time and time again, and I'll be forever grateful to Sherry and the people that walked this path before me for being able to guide me through this stuff, for being able to remind me of the things that I sometimes forget. You know, and if there is any newcomers on here tonight, please, please, please get a big book, get a sponsor, get through the steps. You know, we have a solution in these rooms, and it's available for anybody and everybody that wants it. I promise you, you know, you will live a new life. Our book promises that. That's the only reason I say it. You know, we're told time and time again that this stuff can be reality for any of us. A little bit of practical application. That's all it takes, you know, a little bit of willingness, a little bit of acceptance here and there goes a hell of a long way. And I'll finish on this, guys. You know, I spoke earlier about some of the things that I came into the rooms with, and I had these misconceptions, and I sort of believed that, you know, my mum's 19 years sober, so I'll just be all right. You know, I'll just do what she does and then I'll be all right. But the truth is, I didn't have a clue what my mum was actually doing. I just knew that she went to these meetings sometimes, and that was it. When I come into the rooms and I seen the scripts, you know, and it had all of this God stuff on, and I wasn't against God, you know, I wasn't an atheist or anything like that, but it kind of scared us a little bit. I thought, oh God, I don't want to be one of these Bible basher peoples. No disrespect, by the way, I'd do that now. But at first I was, I don't want to do that, you know, I'll do this bit and I'll do this bit and then I'll leave that bit out and, you know, everything will be all right. But my experience didn't show that. You know, my experience this time around has showed me just how much I need God in my life, just how much better my life is with God. You know, I didn't have that experience previous to this. I was still in that mindset of blaming God for everything that went wrong. Today I say that God does not waste my pain. He does not waste it. My pain is there for me to not only grow from and heal from, you know, but it's there to carry to the next person that needs it. it's there to give away for free, you know, to the next person that's suffering the same thing that I was. And that is the power and the beauty of this stuff, you know. Please, guys, do yourself a favour, get connected, get a sponsor, get a big book, get through the steps, you know. A new life is waiting for you 100%. Thank you so much for allowing us to be of service tonight, guys. I love you lots.